This sermon is a copy of the sermon that will be preached at North Shields Evangelical Church on Sunday the 2nd of June. It's based on 1 Kings chapters 1 to 11, which we learn about the life of King Solomon. I'm going to be going through some of the content of those chapters throughout the sermon, but if you want to read 1 Kings chapter 8 before listening to this, it'll probably be a great help. Spoiler alert. Alfred Hitchcock was a director who founded what we now call the spoiler alert. When Hitchcock's famous film Psycho was released, he said, "Don't give away the ending. It's the only one we have." Knowing the end in advance spoils the experience of a fictional story. It's a lot more enjoyable to experience the twists and turns as surprises. I know that one of our church members likes to watch football highlights without knowing the final score. Not knowing the end is what turns trivial sport into edge-of-the-seat drama, full of excitement, exhilaration, and, if you're a Sunderland fan, despair. When discussing fictional stories and trivial sports results, you should always begin your discussions with spoiler alert, for the end is not something people want to know in advance. Now today we're beginning a book in the Bible called 1 Kings. It describes the history of Israel when it began to be led by kings. The setting of this story is Israel. The first main character we meet is King Solomon. The opening scene is overwhelmingly positive. The nation is enjoying a time of great peace and prosperity in the Promised Land. But straight away we are told a spoiler, and the entire second half of the plot is given away. Spoiler alert! The one nation, Israel, will soon split into two nations, northern Israel and southern Judah. This will only happen in chapter 12, but we are told that it will happen in chapter 1. Spoiler alert, the first king, Solomon, will be the first of many kings who lead the nation astray. Solomon's downfall will only happen in chapter 11, but we are told that it will take place in chapter 3. Spoiler alert, the story will end in devastating tragedy. The Israelites will sin, and their sin will see them end up in Babylon as slaves. We'll only read about this happening at the end of 2 Kings, the sequel to the book of 1 Kings. We will only read about this happening at the very end, but we're told about the ending at the beginning. In chapter 8, Solomon prays, when they sin against you, for there is no one who does not sin, and you become angry with them and give them over to their enemies, who take them captive to their own lands, far away. If you're about to give away the end to a fictional story, you must always announce, spoiler alert. You must give people the opportunity to turn away. If a newsreader is about to reveal a sports score, they should always begin, spoiler alert. They need to give people the chance to shut their ears. So why does God tell us the end of Kings in advance, without warning us of a spoiler? Why are we not allowed to turn away? Well, no doctor, when they give a diagnosis, says, spoiler alert. If you don't want to know that you've got cancer, shut your ears now. Cancer is not a trivial issue. Cancer is not part of a fictional story. You need to be warned about cancer in advance. The more advanced, the better. In much the same way, God wants us to know the truth about sin in advance. For it is a devastating thing, the most devastating thing, to learn about these facts too late. So these 3 facts are: sin leads astray, sin erodes away, and lastly, sin taken away. So firstly, spoiler 1, sin leads astray. Reading from chapter 3. Solomon made a marriage alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt. He took Pharaoh's daughter and brought her into the city of David until he had finished building his own house. Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of David, his father. Solomon wasn't a one-dimensional character. He wasn't a one-dimensional superhero who was perfectly and only good. He wasn't a one-dimensional panto villain who was pure evil. No, Solomon generally loved the Lord, and Solomon was famous for his wisdom by which he knew good and evil, right and wrong. But Solomon was not one-dimensional. Solomon's love and wisdom were not his only traits. Solomon was just as capable of being led astray as anyone else. For there is enough wrong desires in every human to attract us to any and every type of sin. For these reasons, Solomon was led astray gradually, progressively, and bit by bit. Chapter 11, verses 1 and 2. King Solomon, however, loved many foreign white women besides Pharaoh's daughter: Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonites, and Hittites. They were from nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, "You must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods." Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. Solomon was led astray gradually, progressively, bit by bit. His single foreign wife soon became several foreign wives. He then began worshipping the idols of 2 out of 5 of his wives' gods. He followed Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonites, and Moloch, the detestable god of the Ammonites. 2 out of 5 soon became 3 out of 5. Chapter 11, verse 7. On a hill east of Jerusalem, Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab. And 4 out of 5 soon became all. He did the same for all his foreign wives, who burned incense and offered sacrifices to their gods. The gradual nature of sin, the gradual compromise in Solomon's life, the gradual way that Solomon was led astray. It might take you by surprise, for Solomon was supposedly too wise and too holy to be led astray. Maybe you also have a one-dimensional view of yourself as well. Sure, you might not consider yourself perfect, but there are certain sins you'd never commit, certain compromises you'd never make, certain temptations you'd never entertain. Spoiler 1. No one is a one-dimensional character. No one is incapable of being led astray. This was the first fact that we learn about Solomon in chapter 3. Solomon made a marriage alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Solomon loved the Lord. The first fact we learn about Solomon was that he was a mixed bag of desires, some good, some bad. He loved the Lord, but he also loved women in a lustful and ungodly way. Solomon was a mixed bad, and the bad had every potential to lead him astray. The same is true of you and me. We are not one-dimensional. We are a mixed bag. So don't let the sin in you take you by surprise. Perhaps you think you are so immune to going astray that you find yourself condemning others all too easily. You're not like them, after all. Perhaps you think you're so immune to going astray that you fail to take any serious steps to avoid temptation. You don't need to. Perhaps you think you are so immune to going astray that you lack a healthy amount of self-suspicion. I'm too wise to let sin blind me. Surely. Spoiler alert. Sin leads astray. Sin leads astray all of us. Don't let this fact take you by surprise. Spoiler alert 1. Sin leads astray. Spoiler 2. Sin erodes away. When Solomon took the crown, David, his father, encouraged him to act like a man. We read in chapter 2, when the time drew near for David to die, he gave a charge to Solomon his son. I am about to go the way of all the earth, he said. So, be strong, act like a man, and observe what the Lord your God requires. To be a man, someone with strength, as in strength of conviction. To be a man of conviction, means to hold fast to God's command without compromise, no matter what. But, spoiler alert, the best of men are but men at best. Or, in the words of Solomon, for there is no one who does not sin. If we say to somebody, be a man, we're encouraging them to stay true to their convictions. But, as history proves, men are more led by their testosterone levels than their noble convictions. We see this in chapter 10, for when the Queen of Sheba heard about the fame of Solomon and his relationship to the Lord, she came to test Solomon with hard questions. When the Queen of Sheba saw all the wisdom of Solomon and his great kingdom, she was overwhelmed. King Solomon gave the Queen of Sheba all she desired and asked for, besides what he had given her out of his royal bounty. Solomon initially set a limit on how much bounty he'd share with the Queen of Sheba. He wanted to be in control of how much he gave, rather than her having control over him. And yet, at the first sight of a beautiful woman in a slinky dress who he wanted to impress, Solomon gave the Queen of Sheba all she desired and asked for, besides what he had given her out of his royal bounty. Solomon quickly compromised on his initial convictions, more led by his sinful desires than his more noble convictions. Spoiler alert. No matter what set of noble convictions you hold, sin will erode them. If you set yourself standards, you'll soon find yourself breaking them. If you come up with your own version of what is right and what is moral, you'll soon find yourself bending the rules to suit yourself. You can teach others the right way to do something one day, and the next day your students will find you doing the opposite. In the words of the great philosopher Homer Simpson's dad, in this family, we keep our promises, starting now. Abe Simpson was a man of conviction. Keeping promises is important. Abe Simpson expected everyone else to live by this moral code. In this family, we keep our promises. But if Abe Simpson was being honest, he'd not always lived by this code himself. In this family, we keep our promises, starting now. If we fail to even hold to our own convictions about right and what is good, and what is wrong and what is bad, if we fail to even hold to our own convictions, what hope have we of holding fast to God's laws, even though they are much better? Sin leads astray, no matter who we are. Sin erodes our convictions about right and wrong. But why? Why does God give us these spoilers in advance? Why does the Bible insist we have such a negative, depressing picture of ourselves as sinners? Well, there are many reasons, of which those who are Christians will be familiar. Solomon gives another reason, which he thinks will make sense, regardless if a person believes in God or not. In his book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon says, "Do not be over-righteous, neither be over-wise. Why destroy yourself? Do not be over-wicked, and do not be a fool. Why die before your time?" Now, Solomon is not saying, don't try to be too good. He's saying, do not be over-righteous. Don't have an over-inflated sense of self-righteousness. There will be some who are listening to this who are over-righteous, spending their lives trying to convince themselves or others of their own righteousness. Like Paul the Pharisee, we over-righteous folk like to think of ourselves as good people. This is the only version of ourselves we have, or this is the only version of ourselves that we can stand. If you are prone to this type of thinking, you will destroy yourself. It can be devastating to have such a one-dimensional view of yourself as a good person, and then discover something about yourself that says the opposite. There can be nothing more devastating to find out that the good version of you is a lie. That's why so many of us will immediately jump on the defensive when someone points out our flaws or points out how we've been in the wrong. We're over-righteous. We cannot admit our flaws. Do not be over-righteous, neither be over-wise. Why destroy yourself? Do not be over-wicked, and do not be a fool. Why die before your time? There will probably be times in your life when you live as if sin doesn't matter, when you close your eyes to the future consequences, or when you shut your ears to God's word. This is self-destructive as well. That's why God insists on giving us spoilers ahead about the end. That's why God insists on giving us spoilers about the end of sin in 1 Kings. God is warning us about the destruction that sin causes in advance. For God does not want the long-term cost of sin to take us by surprise. Now, by this point in the sermon, you might be saying to yourself, this perspective, the perspective that all of us are more sinful than we give ourselves credit, it's just so negative and depressing. Isn't living with constant guilt psychologically harmful? Won't this view of ourselves totally destroy our self-esteem? Shouldn't we ignore these negative spoilers and save ourselves from depressing ourselves? Well, let's think over Alfred Hitchcock's words again. Don't give away the ending. It's the only one we have. Because there is only one ending to a story, we don't want to know the end in advance. If there is only one ending to the story of our sinfulness, we'll want to avoid these spoilers as well. If the only end to our sin is unending guilt, condemnation, hating ourselves, the loss of our value as people, separation from God, if the knowledge of our sin only leads to these ends, it's understandable that we might not want to think of ourselves as sinners. But these things, unending guilt, condemnation, the loss of our value as people, separation from God, these things need not be the only end to our story. For in chapter 8, Solomon points us to another potential end instead. Solomon prays in chapter 8, when they sin against you, for there is no one who does not sin, and you become angry with them, and give them over to their enemies, who take them captive to their own lands, far away or near. And if they have a change of heart in the land where they are held captive, and repent and plead with you in the land of their captors, and say, we have sinned, we have done wrong, we have acted wickedly, And if they turn back to you with all their heart and soul in the land of their enemies who took them captive, and pray to you toward the land and you gave their ancestors, toward the city that you have chosen, and the temple I have built for your name, then from heaven your dwelling place, hear their prayer and their plea, and uphold their cause. And forgive your people who have sinned against you. Forgive all the offences they have committed against you. In his long prayer in chapter 8, Solomon gives Israel a spoiler. They will continue to sin against God in the future. Because of Old Testament Israel's unique covenant with God, their sin would result in things that could bring the nation to an end. Solomon lists these judgments, the judgments that could bring about the end of the nation. Solomon lists these judgments throughout his prayer. Defeat by their enemies in war could bring about an end to the nation. Drought and famine could bring about an end to the nation. Plagues could bring about an end to the nation. Exile could bring about an end to the nation. But after giving Israel these spoilers, he prays about an alternative, much more positive end. When your people Israel have been defeated by an enemy, because they have sinned against you, and when they turn back to you and give praise to your name, praying and making supplication to you in this temple, then hear from heaven and forgive the sin of your people. When the heavens are shut up, there is no rain, because your people have sinned against you, and when they pray towards this place and give praise to your name and turn from their sin, because you have afflicted them, then hear from heaven and forgive the sin of your servants, your people Israel. When your people go to war against their enemies, wherever you send them, and when they pray to the Lord towards the city you have chosen, and the temple I have built for your name, then hear from heaven their prayer and their plea, and uphold their cause. Solomon prays to God about an alternative, much more positive end. If they pray to God towards God's temple, then the people's sin will be taken away. Everyone, no matter how much or little they agree with the Bible's teaching, is looking to some way to take away their sin. Some want to take away the record of their sin from their memory, trying to forget about it. Some want to take away the concept of guilt. Guilt is no more than a psychological feeling used by the religious in emotional blackmail. Some want to take away the idea that we are accountable to anyone but ourselves, God included. Some want to take away the bad feelings about their flawed selves by doing things so that people will praise them all the time. Everyone is looking for a way to take their sin away. God offers us a much better way, the only way that works. When they sin against you and pray to you towards the land you gave their ancestors, toward the city you have chosen, and toward the temple I have built for your name, hear their prayer and their plea, and uphold their cause, and forgive your people. The people of Israel could turn towards the temple, acknowledge their sin for what it was, and ask for God's forgiveness. If they did this, they could know with certainty that God had taken away their sin. God had taken away his judgment. God would take away the record of their sin from his mind. No matter how far away from God they were in their lives, no matter how far away from the temple they were, the people could turn towards God's temple and seek his forgiveness. Now just a little note, the temple building was a replacement for the tent called the tabernacle. Now, no such temple or tabernacle exists today. This temple was just destroyed many years ago. What we need is another temple, a much better temple. A place where the God of heaven makes himself present on earth. A direction we can turn to and seek God's mercy for our sin. which takes us to the opening few verses of John's Gospel. The Word, which was a nickname for God's Son Jesus. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Jesus made his dwelling among us, literally tabernacled among us. Because Jesus was fully God, God's glory was literally present on earth for a time. And, like his Father, Jesus was full of grace and truth. When we turn towards this temple, when we turn towards Jesus, acknowledge our sin for what it is, and ask for God's forgiveness, we can know, when we do this, we can know with certainty that Jesus has taken away our sin. Because of Jesus, there can be an end to unending guilt. For Jesus took all our guilt on himself on the cross. Because of Jesus, we can confess our sin without fearing total condemnation. For it's all been paid for. It's all been dealt with by Jesus, once and for all. Because of Jesus, we can know that we are valued, despite who we are, despite all our flaws. And acknowledging we are sinners is not as negative or as depressing of a fact as we might first have thought. As Paul wrote in the New Testament, very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were sinners, Christ died for us.